For the last year and a half, I've been gluttonously reading and watching everything Seven Deadly Sins. I've read Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, 18th century Evagrius of Ponticus's 8 Evil Thoughts, St. Gregory's original Seven Deadly Sins coining, and the popularization of the concept with Dante's Divine Comedy, and several other books related to the mythos. All to bring you this 7-part series covering my thoughts, analysis, and opinions regarding the mythos. Following each sin closely, dissecting its origins, causation, effect, and impact on pop culture and society as a whole. Today, we delve into the longing sin of envy. Now, right away, many might confuse envy as just a component of greed. That's why I covered greed before envy, to showcase its possessiveness of resources. Greed implies that you are merely hoarding or continuously accumulating in mass some kind of resource. Envy, however, is a fixation on the belongings of others. It manifests beyond material possessions. Much like greed, one can envy the traits, relationships, and status as well. I can see where these two sins at first might be confused for the shared involvement with similar concepts of material possessions, power, wealth, etc. But beyond those elements, the two sins are rather different from one another. I like to think of envy as the classic trope of the envious nerdy outcast looking at and desiring the position of the star athlete in high school. Often, like those characters, people tend to forget to look inwards towards why they envy others. The fish didn't evolve to fly. Its element is in the water. Each person has something that they can excel at that maybe many others can't. Anyone can learn anything if they put enough time and effort into it, which is why it's also silly to envy someone's ability. After all, nobody is born an artist, musician, or star athlete. The people put a lot of time and effort into the craft. You could assume some of them, especially the athletes, were born with a biological advantage somehow. The fact of the matter is, regardless, they put time into polishing their skills. Another word that gets mixed up with envy quite often is jealousy. Envy and jealousy are quite different in regard to the matter of possession. Envy is a displeasure from others having traits, objects, or status you don't. Jealousy, on the other hand, is supposed to mean a fear of losing what is yours, often the significant other, but can also be jealous of a potential competitor for a position of power or status, and even those taking things you think you deserve first or more. That may come as a surprise to you because jealous is often misused as a synonym for envy. In fact, I'd put jealousy more of a product of pride than envy. Now that we've cleared that up, we can move into. It's easy to assume when you look at the 8 Evil Thoughts by Evagrius that he had forgotten envy. However, if we look closer into the evil thought of sadness, we find it might be just the perfect fit for envy. Sadness, in Evagrius' eyes, is the thoughts of a better reality that doesn't exist. In other words, envying others' reality are one that is completely unobtainable. Which makes sense. Humans have a natural draw to which they cannot obtain. Envy can also include the joy for the misfortunes of others. Envy still has its claws dug into that aspect of sadness as well. If you're envious of another, you would often find joy in their downfall. But, nonetheless, Evagrius did not include envy in his 8 Evil Thoughts. This makes Pope Gregory I to be the deviser of the sin's popularity. Morality of Job, the work responsible for the 7 deadly sins we know today, is a deep moral analysis from within the book of Job in the Bible. The book of Job begins in heaven, at a meeting of sorts between God and the celestials of some sort. One celestial suggests to God that perhaps someone like Job, a man who's been blessed with everything, a family, money, and happiness, may only be serving God due to his privileges in life. So, God, as some sort of test against Job, strips him of everything he owns and loves. Where the book gets interesting is when his friends arrive and suggest to Job that he must have done something wrong to receive a punishment from God. Job goes on to defend himself, as he also expresses his doubts and frustrations with his belief in God. So God does what God does, and shows Job the vastness of the universe, showing him far-off lands and magnificent beasts. Then, just basically tells Job, "You wouldn't get it, you puny human. Your brain isn't built to understand why my actions are just and good. I deal with complexities you could never even begin to comprehend." So Job just kind of accepts this answer and lives within humility in regards to God. Then to make it all up, the book of Job wraps it up with Job getting back double what God took from him in the first place. So, St. Gregory, having probably read the 8 deadly thoughts, and reading the moral arguments and theoretical sins flown around upon Job from his friends, concocted the 7 deadly sins, within 35 books. And in book 26, St. Gregory says this in regards to the sins. "But holy men are properly termed kings, in the language of Scripture, because having been raised above all the motions of the flesh, at one time they control the appetite of lust, at another they moderate the heat of avarice, at one time they bow down to the boastfulness of pride, at another they crush the suggestion of envy, at another they extinguish the fire of passion. They are kings then, because they have learned not to give way to the motions of their temptations, but consenting to them, but to gain the mastery by ruling over them." Conquering the sins is a common theme since Aristotle and his concepts of virtuous living. In the case of envy, Evagrius had not touched on the concept. This leads me to strongly believe that Pope Gregory also read or heard Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics as well. This may answer the question of how envy got a roster spot on the 7 deadly sins, but there's still the question of, how does envy exist biologically? Animals have some capacity for envy, given social hierarchies like that of dogs and wolves. Envy is deeply rooted in the social aspects of humans and animals. Most of the time, envy is subconscious, and you can often catch yourself not even actively thinking about the subject of your envy. Personally, I find it hard to pinpoint the origins of envy in my own mind. At times, it feels like envy can be embedded in pride, such as seeing someone similar doing better off in an activity, pursuit, or life in general. At other times, it could be out of lust for another's partner, or even at times, we envy for no logical reason at all. Envy also has no bounds on your relationships. You can envy your friends, family, and enemies all equally. I often found through questioning my friends that you can also find out more about what people desire most by instead asking what they envy most in others. Common answers in social circles include envying others' looks, social prowess, abilities, or possessions. Things I'm sure most can agree they've envied themselves. However, envy is most likely linked to social rank more than most of the other sins. At least, in regards to what one envies. Nearly everyone in my social circle is in their 20s, educated, and has a disposable income enough to drive a car, have a roof over their head, and travel. When I asked my local homeless citizens in my hometown what they envied most, some common answers are rather heartbreaking. Many said they envied those who could afford to buy a warm meal every day, drive around in a car, have access to AC, bathe regularly, or even have people around them that love them. Which really puts life into perspective, but also opens my eyes to envy's ultimate potential. In my opinion, envy can be a driving force of good, if steered by the right driver. Envy magnetizes us towards our deepest desires. This means that if we're envious of something that is obtainable, we could, in theory, be driven by our envy to go after it. That's if you're able to find a healthy level of envy. Overdoing it can lead to progressive tendencies, such as resentment, plotting, or even worse, hostile acts towards the subject of your envy. In a study done by, these names, named The Evolutionary Psychology of Envy and Jealousy, it was concluded that people tend to envy those more closely related to their wealth, skill, or status than those that were seemingly out of reach. For example, a beggar wouldn't be as envious of Bill Gates as he is envious of the everyday man he sees around him. Meaning, Our minds are already programmed to make incremental improvements based on the way we see others around us live their lives. That is until feelings of envy grew out of control, leading some down very dark paths. In the book of Genesis lies a disturbing story of brotherly greed. Joseph, the son of Jacob, is shown great favor by his father when he receives a coat of many colors. His brothers' envy grew as they had suspicions of Joseph being chosen to be the future leader of their family. This was further amplified when Joseph told them of dreams he had where his brothers had bowed before him. They had initially plotted to murder Joseph, but the eldest son, Reuben, had instead persuaded his brothers to pull a little prank and throw Joseph into a pit, in which he had secretly planned to rescue him at a later time. Instead, the brothers kidnapped Joseph and sold him into slavery for 20 pieces of silver. He would then be presumed dead as his brothers took his coat and dipped it in goat's blood and tore it as if an animal had mauled him to death. Much of Genesis is purely allegorical, and this story is no different. The end of this story concludes with Joseph beating all the odds and eventually becoming governor of Egypt, resulting in him rationing supplies for a famine that he had predicted. This results in his family coming to beg him for supplies, in which he just forgives his brothers for their envious wrath against him and asks them to all settle down in Egypt with him. Which honestly I think is really lame and obviously not a real thing that happened. How in the world would you go through nearly a decade of slavery and come out of it forgiving your brothers for that, regardless if you ended up on top or not? If anything, given their envy of his leadership in the family, imagine how they would have reacted when they found out he leads a whole country now. Yeah, I think I'd pass on having that kind of liability around me personally. Envy was a difficult sin for me to cover. I don't often look at the lives of others and see myself desiring what they possess. I'm often content in my own life, with my own possessions and status in the world. If I had to say, I think I envy others' dedications to their specific passion the most. I often find myself unable to focus on one thing or another. This whole series is just one large fixation or obsession that just kind of randomly popped up in my brain. At the same time, I take pride in that ability. There's an obvious advantage to hyperfixations, and I'm glad I'm able to put some work into videos like this. I've obviously moved on to the next subject of obsession, but I still intend to finish this series. I want to leave you with a quote by poet Richard H. Stoddard. "We love in others what we lack ourselves, and would be everything but we are. Find happiness in yourself. Use envy as a driving force to better yourself rather than a brew in a vile concoction of hatred, sadism, and sadness." See y'all later now.